September 13th, 1978, Burbank, California, a Wednesday. On the set of one of America's most popular game shows, a bachelorette named Cheryl Bradshaw is asking flirty questions to three men she cannot see. The audience laughs on cue. The host grins. It is the lightest, safest, most disposable kind of television ever made. Bachelor number one is winning her over. He's quick, he's confident. The host has introduced him as a successful photographer who enjoys skydiving and motorcycling. Cheryl picks him. The audience cheers. The host announces their prize, a trip to Magic Mountain, tennis lessons, confetti light romance, 1970 style. And then, backstage, something happens that television cameras don't capture. Cheryl Bradshaw talks to Bachelor number one face to face, without the partition, without the format, without the script. And every instinct in her body starts screaming. She would later put it simply, I started to feel ill. He was acting really creepy. I turned down his offer. She called the show's contestant coordinator the next day and said she couldn't go through with the date. Weird vibes, she said. Something wrong underneath the charm. What Cheryl Bradshaw did not know, what the show's producers did not know, what ABC did not know, what the studio audience clapping along did not know, was that Bachelor number one had already raped and nearly beaten to death an 8-year-old girl. That he had already been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. That he had already been convicted, imprisoned, and paroled twice. And that by the time he sat down in that chair with a boutonniere and a white-collar shirt, he had already murdered at least 5 people. Her gut feeling may have saved her life. But here's the question this story is really about. The question nobody in that studio was asking. Why was he free? To understand how Rodney Alcala ended up on that game show stage, you have to go back 10 years to a September morning in 1968 on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. A little girl named Tali Shapiro was walking to school. She was 8 years old. A car pulled up alongside her. The driver was a 25-year-old UCLA Fine Arts graduate, handsome, well-spoken, persuasive. He told her he had a beautiful picture to show her. She kept walking. He kept following. Eventually, she got in the car. What neither of them knew was that a good Samaritan had seen the whole thing. Another motorist, an ordinary driver on his morning commute, watched a grown man coax a small child into a car, and something about it felt wrong enough that he followed them. He tracked the car to an apartment on DeLong Prey Avenue and called the police. LAPD officer Chris Camacho arrived at the apartment and knocked. A man's voice said he was getting dressed. Hold on. Then silence. Camacho kicked the door in. What he found inside was Tali Shapiro, raped, beaten with a steel bar, lying in so much blood that Camacho would later say he was certain she was dead. She wasn't. She survived. Barely. She spent 32 days in a coma. The man who did it went out the back door. He left the little girl to die on his kitchen floor and ran. His name was Rodney James Alcala, and the hunt for him should have ended everything. For 3 years, Rodney Alcala lived as John Berger. He earned a degree from one of the most prestigious film programs in America, and in the summer of 1971, he took a job at an arts camp in New Hampshire as a counselor, working with children. In June of that year, a 23-year-old TWA flight attendant named Cornelia Crilly was found raped and strangled in her Manhattan apartment. Her murder would go unsolved for 40 years. It was Alcala. Then, in August 1971, 2 girls at the New Hampshire camp were at the local post office when they noticed something. Their camp counselor's face was on the wall, on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. They told the camp dean. Alcala was arrested and extradited to California to finally answer for what he did to Tali Shapiro. This is the moment the system had him. Dead to rights, a child rape, an attempted murder, a cross-country flight from justice, 3 years as a fugitive. This is the moment it should have ended. It didn't. By 1971, Tali Shapiro's family had moved to Mexico, in part to escape the trauma of what had happened. Her parents refused to let their daughter, still a child, return to testify and relive the attack. Without their primary witness, prosecutors couldn't make the rape and attempted murder charges stick. So, they made a deal. Rodney Alcala, a man who had beaten an 8-year-old with a steel bar and left her for dead, pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of child molestation. Under California's indeterminate sentencing system, he received a sentence of 1 year to life. Let parole boards release offenders once they demonstrated rehabilitation. In theory, dangerous men stayed locked up for decades. In practice, the decision rested with prison psychiatrists and parole boards, and Rodney Alcala was very, very good at performing rehabilitation. Detective Steve Hodel, one of the men who arrested him, later said he fully expected Alcala to serve at least 20 years. The parole board released him after 34 months. Less than 2 months after his release, Alcala was arrested again for assaulting a 13-year-old girl known in court records as Julie J. She had accepted what she thought was a ride to school. 2 months. That's how long rehabilitation lasted. And here's the part that defies belief. The system did it again. Another indeterminate sentence, another parole board, another release, this time after roughly 2 years. In 1977, Rodney Alcala, twice convicted, twice paroled, got a job as a typesetter at the Los Angeles Times. He told co-workers he was a professional photographer. He carried a portfolio. He approached women constantly, on beaches, in parking lots, at bus stops, offering to shoot their portraits. He was handsome, credentialed, and utterly plausible. His parole officer, in a decision that remains almost incomprehensible, granted him permission to travel to New York City that summer, a repeat offender and known flight risk allowed to leave the state. In New York that July, a 23-year-old woman named Ellen Jane Hoover, the daughter of famous Hollywood nightclub owner, whose godfathers were Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., wrote a name in her calendar, John Berger. She was never seen alive again. Her remains were found a year later on the Rockefeller estate in Westchester County. The murders accelerated. November 1977, Jill Barcombe, 18, a young woman recently arrived from New York, was found strangled and beaten near Mulholland Drive. Police initially attributed her death to the Hillside Strangler. December 1977, Georgia Wickstead, 27, a nurse, was beaten and strangled in her Malibu apartment. June 1978, Charlotte Lamb, 32, a legal secretary, was found strangled in the laundry room of her El Segundo apartment complex. Each scene showed the same signature: victims beaten, strangled, sometimes revived and strangled again, prolonging the attack, and posed deliberately after death. Prosecutors would later say that Alcala toyed with his victims. I'm not going to go further into those details than that. You don't need them, and neither do their families. In March 1978, in the middle of all this, LAPD detectives investigating the Hillside Strangler murders actually interviewed Rodney Alcala. They were looking at the wrong serial killer. They cleared him and moved on. 6 months later, he walked onto the set of The Dating Game. The Dating Game was one of the most successful shows in television history. Its alumni include Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tom Selleck, Steve Martin, and Farrah Fawcett, all of whom appeared as contestants before they were famous. In September 1978, its producers cast a charming photographer named Rodney Alcala as Bachelor Number One. There were no standardized background checks, none. A man who had served 2 prison terms for attacking children, who had been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, was vetted by nothing more than an audition and a talent coordinator's impression that he was handsome and articulate. Fellow contestant Jed Mills, Bachelor Number Two, an actor who would later appear on Seinfeld, met Alcala in the green room before taping. His description, years later, he jumps in and he says, "I always get my girl. Really, really creepy." He called Alcala a standout creepy guy in my life. Alcala flirted, joked, and delivered suggestive one-liners. Cheryl Bradshaw picked him. The audience applauded a serial killer winning a date on national television. And then Cheryl's instincts did what 7 years of institutional oversight had failed to do. She said no. Investigators and psychologists have since speculated, and it is speculation, to be clear, that the rejection may have accelerated what came next. What is documented is this: within a year of that broadcast, Rodney Alcala committed at least 2 more murders. In June 1979, Jill Parental, 21, was killed in her Burbank apartment. And on June 20th, 1979, A 12-year-old girl named Robin Samsoe borrowed a friend's bicycle to ride to ballet class in Huntington Beach. She never got there. Earlier that day, Robin and her friends had been on the beach when a man approached them and asked to take their pictures. He said he was a photographer. A neighbor grew suspicious and the man left, but not before the girls took a good look at his face. 12 days after Robin disappeared, her remains were found in the foothills near Santa Anita Canyon Road. I'll spare you the details the prosecutors read at trial. They are among the worst I have encountered making this channel. Police circulated a sketch based on the beach witnesses' descriptions. And here, finally, after 11 years, 7 system failures, and at least 7 murders, one part of the machine worked. Alcala's parole officer saw the sketch and recognized his own client. Rodney Alcala was arrested in July 1979 and held without bail. In a Seattle storage locker he had rented, investigators found hundreds of photographs of women, girls, and boys, many in compromising positions, most never identified to this day. And among the jewelry stashed in a small pouch, a pair of gold ball earrings matching the ones Robin Samsoe was wearing the day she vanished. He was convicted of Robin's murder in 1980 and sentenced to death. If this were a normal story, it would end here. It is not a normal story. In 1984, the California Supreme Court overturned the conviction. Jurors had been improperly told about his prior sex crimes. A second trial in 1986 convicted him again, sentenced to death again. In 2001, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned that conviction too. While Alcala sat on death row filing appeals and suing the prison system over a slip and fall and the lack of a low-fat menu, science caught up with him. In 2003, under a new California law, correction officials collected DNA from prisoners over Alcala's strenuous objections. Prosecutor Matt Murphy, newly assigned to the third Samsoe trial, also had the jewelry from the Seattle storage locker re-examined. The results rewrote the case. Alcala's DNA matched semen from the murder scenes of Jill Barcombe, Georgia Wickstead, Charlotte Lamb, and Jill Parental, and DNA on a pair of earrings in his locker matched Charlotte Lamb. The man convicted of one murder was now provably a serial killer. At the 2010 trial, Alcala, a man with reported genius-level IQ, chose to represent himself. What followed was one of the most surreal spectacles in American courtroom history. He questioned himself on the witness's stand for 5 hours, addressing himself as Mr. Alcala in a deepened voice, then answering his normal one. He played the jury his dating game episode, arguing the earrings in his locker were his own, worn on the show. Jed Mills, his fellow bachelor, pointed out the obvious. No man wore earrings on television in 1978. The jury deliberated less than 2 days and convicted him of all 5 murders. In the penalty phase, the prosecution called one final witness, Tali Shapiro. The 8-year-old girl from Sunset Boulevard was now a grown woman. She took the stand and faced the man who had left her for dead 42 years earlier, the man the system had given every chance to stop, starting with what he did to her. "My name is Tali Shapiro," she said. "I'm alive because I have a guardian angel." Alcala, incredibly, apologized to her from the defense table. Her response later was perfect. She couldn't even tell you what he said because she wasn't listening. And then she said the line that defines this entire story, the line this channel exists to examine. "It should have stopped with me. Why in the world are there so many other victims?" Rodney Alcala was sentenced to death for the 3rd time in March 2010. In 2012, he pleaded guilty in New York to the murders of Cornelia Curley and Ellen Hoover. In 2016, Wyoming charged him with the 1977 murder of Christine Thornton, whose body had been found on a ranch. He was too ill to extradite. Investigators believe the true number of his victims may be far higher. Estimates run from dozens to as many as 130. The photographs from the storage locker, hundreds of faces, most never identified, remain one of the most haunting open questions in American criminal history. Rodney Alcala died of natural causes on July 24, 2021 at the hospital near Corcoran State Prison. He was 77. California's death penalty moratorium meant he was never executed. He never provided a full accounting of his crimes. Let's lay it out plainly. Between 1968 and 1979, here is every point where Rodney Alcala could have been should have been, stopped. 1968, escapes from an active crime scene during the Tali Shapiro attack, evades a federal manhunt for 3 years while attending NYU under a transparent alias. 1972, prosecutors, without their child witness, reduce rape and attempted murder to child molestation. 1974, parole board releases him after 34 months of a 1-to-life sentence. 1974, attacks 13-year-old Julie J. within 2 months of release. 1976 to 1977, paroled a second time after approximately 2 years. 1977, parole officer authorizes interstate travel. Ellen Hover dies in New York that summer. 1978, interviewed and cleared during the Hillside Strangler investigation, mid-spree. 1978, cast on national television with no background check. 8 chances. And the only 2 people in this entire timeline who read Rodney Alcala correctly in the moment were a bachelorette with a bad feeling and a motorist in 1968 who trusted his gut and followed a car. The professionals, the parole boards, the psychiatrists, the prosecutors who cut the deal, the producers who cast him, all looked at the same man and saw what he wanted them to see: a handsome, intelligent, rehabilitated photographer. Matt Murphy, the prosecutor who finally put the case beyond appeal, said it best. The 70s in California was insane as far as treatment of sexual predators. Rodney Alcala is a poster boy for this. California abolished indeterminate sentencing in 1977, the year Alcala's killing spree reached full speed. The reform came from a broad recognition that the system had failed. For at least 7 people, it came too late. Alcala was convicted of 7 murders and charged in an 8th. Investigators from coast to coast believe the real number is dramatically higher. Estimates range from dozens to 130. In 2010, the police released over 100 photographs from a storage locker to the public, hoping to identify the people in them. Some came forward alive. Others were identified by grieving families. Most remain unknown. If you recognize anyone in those photos, they remain publicly available through the Huntington Beach Police Department. Investigators still want to hear from you. This is one of the only true crime cases where the audience can, in a literal sense, still participate in the investigation. In 2013, one photograph led authorities to confirm the identity of Christine Thornton, whose remains had been unidentified in Wyoming since 1982. Her sister recognized her in the released photos. The camera Alcala used as a lure became, decades later, the map of his crimes. After Alcala's death in 2021, a woman named Morgan Rowan came forward publicly, describing an attack by Alcala in 1968, weeks before Tali Shapiro. Her account suggests the timeline of his violence may have begun earlier than the official record. It is one more indication that the confirmed cases are a floor, not a ceiling. Tali Shapiro said it should have stopped with her. She's right, it should have. But here's the question I keep coming back to, and the one I want to leave you with. Which failure mattered most? The plea deal, the parole boards, the psychiatrists who believed a psychopath's performance of rehabilitation, the travel permission, the television producers who never checked? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. No single person in this chain did something monstrous. Each one made a decision that was defensible inside their own small corner of the system. The prosecutor had no witness. The parole board followed the law as it was written. The producers ran a game show, not a courthouse. And the sum of all those defensible decisions was 8 bodies and a storage locker full of faces nobody can name. That's what this channel is about now. Not just what killers did, but every door that was left open for them. Tell me in the comments, which doors should have been closed first? If you want to go deeper on this case, the CBS 48 Hours episode, The Killing Game, the final story reported by the late correspondent Harold Dow, is the definitive television treatment. And Anna Kendrick's 2024 film, Woman of the Hour, tells the dating game story from Cheryl Bradshaw's perspective, deliberately centering the survivors instead of the killer. Subscribe if you want more cases examined like this, the crime and the system that let it happen. There's a full back catalog waiting for you. I'll see you in the next one.